I think it's fair, well, without doubt, the use of helicopters in conjunction with yachts entails the highest level of operational risk that yacht will become involved with. And yet the intricacies of that remain quite poorly understood. To help us guide us through some of those intricacies, we've got an expert panel with us. If I can introduce Simon Mitchell of Starspeed, Richard Selby of Maritime Aviation, and at the end here we've got Phil Noad from the Cayman Islands. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves briefly?
Thanks. So Starspeed is a name that doesn't necessarily appear in a lot of marketing because on the whole, obviously we're in that sort of business where owners don't necessarily want us promoting ourselves so much, but we've been around doing this for 25 years now, and we've seen things done in every way, and I would hope we've seen most mistakes done, and we've seen most successes achieved. So hopefully we can just pass on that advice that says people don't have to learn the hard way.
Thanks. Richard?
Richard Selby from Maritime Aviation. We provide heliport design consultancy in the superyacht world, along with crew training and specialist equipment supply. We're all about educating and obviously wanting to promote the fun side of things, but quite often we have to say no, and I think that's some of the things that we're going to talk about today.
Phil Noad, Cayman Registry, but my sort of being on here today, I'm really a Red Ensign Group representative, so I'm chairing the technical committee for the aviation inspector bodies, so we can talk a bit about that, what we do in those meetings and what we're intending to do, but that's my input for today will be around that subject and how we do surveys and inspections together.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, helicopters on yachts is a complex interaction of civil aviation and maritime. Where the regulatory framework, where does it come from?
So in the yacht industry, we've got the various yacht codes, and they typically have an annex to that, which covers probably more the hardware of those arrangements. So, but that's been transposed, obviously, from aviation industry standards, the ICAO standards. So we've got those codes. Is our regulatory framework, which is primarily covering, we'll touch on this, commercial operations. That said, we'll probably speak a bit later on about regulation for pleasure, private use as well. Maybe someone else wants to take that one, and I can jump in after.
I think it's worth noting that ICAO is a bit like the IMO. It's a UN body headquartered in Montreal, and they have the International Civil Aviation Organization. So they have a General Assembly every 3 years, and they've had one most recently last September. And it's interesting that one of the key agenda items for the Assembly was revisiting aerodrome regulations and heliport regulations. And so ICAO is going to be revisiting aerodrome stroke heliport regulations. And the UK CAA is at the moment conducting a big review of regulations around that. And it is undoubtedly going to touch helidecks because it's in essence, what's going to happen is the helideck will become a heliport. And so we are anticipating some redefinitions, some reclassifications, coming through. So over the next few years, it is definitely something that's going to need to be kept an eye on.
Could I also add that we do, probably less often now, but we just see some confusion at the beginning of projects about what regulations a designer, a naval architect should be looking at. For instance, CAP 437 was designed for use in oil and gas installations, but it appeared to be quite a dominant feature in some of the projects where actually the kind of regulation that Simon alluded to, ICAO 9261, would be the lead in all of that, and there are annexes as well. And again, this is where we want to educate about the terminology that should be used. Heliport should be one, shipboard heliport, and so on.
Okay. And if I'm an owner and I want to incorporate a heliport in my yacht, where do I start, and at what stage should I start?
So this is a really good point, and it's probably the key point for this conference. Quite often, as heliport design consultants, we get contacted at the latter stages of the project when the yacht is in the yard, everything's been done, we're probably even beyond change order, where what we actually would promote is the engagement of subject matter experts when it's at the drawing board stage. And the reason for that is the question that quite often gets missed is asking the owner the very first question, which is, what would you like to do with your helicopter? Because once we know that, then we can talk to them around the helicopter that they probably need to operate. And then from there, of course, the designers, the naval architects can build a yacht that can support that design helicopter. That often quite gets missed. And to be honest, 2 or 3 times a year, we will have undertaken an aviation capability review on behalf of a shipyard or an owner, which actually indicates that the yacht and the helicopter that's been purchased is not compatible.
I think, to pick up what Richard's saying, it's quite often people are jumping to the answer before they've looked at the question. So the thing is, you have to realize with a helicopter, it's not just a different type of aircraft, it's a different type of aviation. So what do I mean by a different type of aviation? So helicopters are not there for their own sake. They're there because they solve problems. Okay, because the last thing you want to use is a helicopter. It's the last solution you reach for. And generally, it's because the helicopter makes possible what nothing else can. So the starting point should be, before you think helicopter, you say, what problem am I trying to solve? And when you've tried to solve that problem every other way, and the only other solution is a helicopter, then you say, okay, let's talk about a helicopter. So the starting point has to be, what problem am I trying to solve? Once you've said that, okay, then that leads you to, okay, how does the helicopter solve that problem? Okay? Because far too often, you get to a situation where somebody says, I've got a helicopter, now what do I do with it? That's the wrong way round. Does that make sense? Yeah. You start off, and then you justify everything that goes with it on that basis. Okay? Because a problem is another headache. Sorry, a helicopter is another headache. And to be honest, you don't want it unless you have to have it. Does that make sense? I know I'm in the helicopter industry, but equally, you know, it is important to get the right thinking from the start. And I think one of the problems we've found year on year on year on year is the fact that choosing the helicopter operator is the last choice in the chain, the last decision in the chain, whereas actually we should be the first point of, once you've got to that point that says the problem needs to be solved with a helicopter, you need to then start to talk to a helicopter operator to start guiding you through some of the issues that will come up. Because by saying, okay, the helicopter doesn't arrive until the yacht's built and it's in commission, and, oh yeah, we've got 4 weeks to guest ops, let's get a helicopter operator. There's not many big problems we can solve at that stage. At the end of the day, we can do the best with what we've got. Whereas if you talk to us from the beginning, we can start guiding you to avoid some of the pitfalls that have been made over the last 25 years. Does that make sense? Okay.
I think just to follow up on that, when we go for a kick-off meeting, we work with about 70 shipyards. Often the contractual GA is already set, and there's a bit too much emphasis on just the physical dimensions of a deck. And there might be other modelling to be done, you know, due to airflow issues around from exhaust and ventilation and obstructions. So yeah, and at that point is often when we see us recommending that they immediately get in contact with someone, a consultant, let's say, and bring them in. But yeah, it's unusual to find a consultant already in a lot of the projects that we're involved in. Some of the big shipyards, they're used to that, but we're dealing with so many shipyards, there's a real variance, and they, as you say, they're going about it the wrong way. They're looking at it as a dimensional issue and a structural strength issue, but not looking maybe where it's best to be located, either fore or aft, clean air and that sort of thing.
And do you find shipyards, designers, are they receptive always to input from you guys, or do they sometimes see that as their freedom being fettered, or do they believe they have all the expertise they need in-house?
Well, if I could just quickly say, the first shipyard that actually asked me some of the question, I'll say yes, I'll give you the answer. But I have to say, no shipyard has ever approached us. So the answer is, when one approaches us, I'll tell you how it goes. But maybe Richard's had a different experience.
Some shipyards do, some don't. I would say the majority probably don't. And then we'll get involved somewhere along the line through yacht management or something like that. So therefore, as Phil has alluded to, the infrastructure on board, and here's something hopefully many people might understand, is that the supporting equipment required for safety reasons to support those helicopter operations. Why on earth would we find that locker 20, 30 metres down a walkway of, say, for instance, a 110-metre boat, where the crew have actually got to go all the way down there? Why would we see a fire hydrant locker 2 lengths of hose away from the heliport even before they start? So these are the sort of things that we can get involved with and support, because it is all about the actual operation of what is a commercial heliport.
Yeah, I think it's some other things in the designs that we tend to promote or recommend. Yachts, heliports don't get used that often, and then often a lot of the year not used a lot, and then used a lot for a short period of time. And so crew training is an issue for us, and firefighting system is quite an interesting one too. Our preference, for example, would be to be built into the design these pop-up nozzles, because you don't need so many crew, and it's a much safer system for if there is a crashed helicopter as well, for dealing with all the fuel on deck. So again, that's already often built into the contract. They've gone for foam monitors rather than, I think, is a neater solution and more effective solution in terms of firefighting, and it leads less training for the crew, and it's can immediately be put into effect, and it's more effective. So some of those things, albeit you can have an option, the way that yachts are used, or heliports on yachts are used, it lends itself much better to different fixed firefighting systems. You can have either for the regulations, but again, it's trying to think what's best for a yachting environment in terms of crew training and yeah.
And bearing in mind the crew training as it stands at the moment, we are trying to train yacht crew, which is not their day job, to manage the safety on a heliport in 2.5 days, which would take a professional aviation firefighter 13 weeks to achieve. There's something wrong in that math somewhere.
I think that there are issues both big and small, and I think, you know, as helicopter operators, we end up sort of operating many different types of helicopter for many different vessels, and we see things done in different ways, and we can sometimes see some of the things that wouldn't be known by the shipyard, or maybe even by the yacht broker, for things like simple things like on some yachts, for example, we've seen the helideck put behind the owner's gym, and then you go say, okay, that may have made sense on the drawing board, but just think how the owner's life now operates, because the owner wants to use the gym in private, and he or she will probably want to have little time between jumping out of the gym and into the helicopter. We need 45 minutes to prep the helicopter, but he doesn't want us on the helideck. etc. You can see all of these things. You say, well, have you thought about the flow of how it's all going to work before you make that decision? And, you know, as operators, we could probably give you the benefit of that advice before it's cost you lots of money, if that makes sense, or upset the owner. And similarly, I have to say, and I'm, you know, I know there's lots of highly qualified and you know, expert naval architects here, and I'm not doing this any criticism, but in aviation, we've had to learn the hard way, human factors matters. Yeah. And generally, you need to think about all the ways people are going to get things wrong before you check the design as if it's right. And so the number of times we see things designed, you just go, has anyone had any thoughts about human factors there? So classic things like, we'd go into a hangar and you'd see a generator panel for controlling the electrical power to the helideck, and right above it is a big red button. And the big red button has no label. So when an engineer goes, how do I stop electrical power to the helideck? There's a big red button above that electrical panel. That must be it. Hits the big red button and fires the fire extinguishers. Human factors. What? Come on, guys. You know, there's a severe lack of human factor thinking in some of the things that we see. But you know, that's a little bit of detail. But some of the big stuff, we absolutely have seen things done in many different ways, and we could give you the benefit of that advice. You know, that's it. You know, if you talk to us early enough, we can give you the benefit of that.
Yachting with helicopters is absolutely unique. It doesn't take place anywhere else other than the military. And I think, whilst that sounds quite of a sweeping statement, I think in terms of safety, our expectations are for those crew members to react when things do go wrong. And of course, everybody wants to see everybody walk away from anything that may go wrong. But you know, there are other experts in the room on the aviation side, and we were talking earlier on about having a process where we could all learn from some of these mistakes. But unfortunately, due to a lot of the time the confidentiality of yachting, you know, we're unable to actually look at that, where in other spheres of maritime or in the military or even in civil aviation, we would be able to do that and learn from it. So that's another challenge that we have. But hopefully now, again, working with Phil and the flag team, that we are looking at these guidance notes. And the only objective is to try and make it safer.
Yeah. I think I'll just pick up on sort of the work we're doing. So probably about a year ago now, we started this technical committee, and it was the objectives there really was to have harmonised interpretations across the aviation inspection bodies, to have some unified requirements of how they undertake inspections. We've changed the certification regime, so we do annual inspections now with class and flag there for two reasons. One is we can do drills, so we can do simulate a helicopter crash and see how the crew respond, but of course we've got someone from the AIBs there who is more familiar with the initial response, and of course the flag are more familiar with the follow-on responses to abandon ship. But at the same time, there's other learnings there, technical learning. So we're looking at the refueling system, we're looking at the electrical system, we're looking at the structure. So we're trying to make sure that we've got there's less potential for gaps between what we're doing, someone expecting someone else is looking after it. At the new build stage, we have quite a clear delegation of roles and responsibilities, and we're just making sure that carries on through the life of the vessel, and then it can feed back into the system where we're not managing defects properly or we're not labeling as different ways. So we're just trying to work through a way of being more harmonized between the inspector bodies and sharing learnings between us. Because sometimes there's a change in helicopter, and then it's my intruder alarm. Yeah, so, and then maybe the structure hasn't been reassessed for that, and it goes on from there. But having the class surveyor there, he can then go back to his office and check what the strength loads could be, or could it be reassessed. So that's been really valuable. Last year we did 3 direct monitoring visits with the AIBs, and we've already done one this year. And each time we're finding new stuff. So we're finding this sort of this closer contact is really, really helpful. And we've got to the point now that also we're going to be issuing a guidance notice for the Red Air Design Group. We'll share it with our friends at the Marshall Islands. Mark's been very helpful as well in a lot of this work we've been doing, just covering a lot of aspects we're covering today, which is when to be involved in the initial design, how the new regime for inspections will be carried out, touch and go, which you might want to cover in a minute. All these things, and also, like I was talking about the different firefighting systems and all best practice, and also the legal framework. Because, sorry, I can't turn that one off, I'm afraid, for doing. So we'll be looking at all that sort of stuff, but even the legal framework, so that might be useful for the insurers to understand on how in our legislation it fits for pleasure yachts in private use, and you might want to cover the insurance bit as well. So that's where we're at with that. It's working very well, yeah, I have to say.
And so this will impinge upon private yachts and helicopters in private use as well. Up until now, what sort of regulation have we seen for private operations?
You want to touch first or me?
You go, and I'll turn my phone off.
So another interesting element within helicopter operations on yachts, there is this very broad brush perception that you can do what you like, but actually you can't, and there's other stuff that Phil will touch on at the moment. Our main objective is to improve safety. And the only way that we can do that is to get support in trying to encourage those yachts that operate a non-commercial or private heliport to sort of engage with us and make sure that we can satisfy as much as we can to make it a safe place to operate a helicopter. Now, unfortunately, it did become a little bit of a challenge, and we ended up just discussing how the insurers view this particular issue, because, of course, they don't have to comply with the normal regulations that a commercial heliport would. So they've come up with a great idea, and some of them may be in the room, but we've been discussing this subject for about 18 months now. And as a result, in them seeing some of the behaviours that we've discussed, they've decided to engage in exploring the existing helicopter clause for insurance, along the lines of exploring tick boxes, for want of a better word, that could enhance the safety of helicopter operations on those vessels. And so, for example, it may well be that an insurer may insist on an aviation safety audit being undertaken on board by a recognised organisation, that the crew are trained appropriately, that there is a shipboard heliport operations manual, and that they have the appropriate equipment. There is a flag state that in the past couple of years have really reviewed what they do, and they've determined in their most recent amendment that if the heliport is not constructed and designed and operated to a commercial standard, then it has to be deemed not in use. So, in other words, they can't operate in the private sphere or the non-commercial sphere. So the challenge for us as aviation experts is, if it's commercial, we've got a recognised standard that it can be designed, constructed and operated to. If it's not, that becomes the challenge. But Phil will touch on some of your elements that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, we do, even in our private legislation, there is a still duty of care for the owner to provide a safe working platform. So there is a potential liability issue here for the owner, and I think using the insurance helicopter clause that they're developing, that will obviously go a long way to addressing some of that liability. So I think, the other flag, we can name it because it's Malta, because I mean, fair play to them. They've mandated it for pleasure yachts in private use to have a fully certified helideck, which probably we won't do, but we want to get as close as possible practical to that. So that's certainly the direction of travel I think we'll be following, albeit and maybe well tying in with this helicopter clause in order to be able to demonstrate that.
I think there's a couple of points that are worth making at this stage. On terms of insurance, I have to say that without naming them, now that there's a number of insurance brokers and underwriters who've got very used to dealing with yachts now, so it's now a very familiar area. So, there's a good bunch of experience now, very familiar with the idea of helicopters and yachts within the London market, and, I'm sure if various brokers give me, no, but the experience is there. Often what you end up doing is sort of getting to some cross waiver of subrogation agreement where the yacht insures the yacht, the helicopter insures the helicopter, and it sort of creates a nice clean sort of break between insurances there. And that's a pretty standard arrangement. But I think the point I want to make at this stage is to make sure that you understand the regulation of the yacht and the regulation of the helicopter are separate, okay? So the commercial classification of the yacht has nothing to do with the helicopter. Does that, okay. So I think it's often confused, and it's important to make that distinction. The commercial classification of the yacht has nothing to do with the helicopter. And equally, the commercial classification of the helicopter has nothing to do with the yacht, okay? Because the regulatory responsibility for the way the helicopter is operated, and actually the regulatory responsibility for landing on the yacht itself, entirely sits with me as the accountable manager, okay, of the helicopter, okay? Because ultimately, the decision to land or not to land is entirely with the helicopter operator, okay? Now, it's useful to know, and it's useful to understand what the classification of the yacht is, and et cetera, but ultimately, the responsibility sits with the helicopter operator. Now, it becomes really, really important to understand that the helicopter regulation gets complicated. And there are some bear traps out there. So again, it's really worth saying, who are you flying, how are they flying, and how are they paying for it? Because there are some really, really big dark holes of liability out there if you get that wrong. Because if you find yourself slipping into commercial air transport without having planned for it, woe betide you. And it's very easy to slide into that particular black hole. So I say, of all the questions you need to answer, you need to go into, is saying, how are these passengers, how are these people coming and off from the yacht, how are they paying for that helicopter? Because it seriously changes an awful lot of things. It not only changes things like insurance, it changes the mode of operation, it changes the training for pilots, it changes the flight time and duty limitations, it changes the equipment that's fitted to the helicopter, and. So it's really, of all the questions, it's the big one.
And I think there's a bit of a misconception that that people can remove themselves from the scope of what Simon's talking about by touch and go operations. I know that's a term you're not fond of, Richard. I wonder if you want to touch on that.
Yeah. Touch and go does not exist. This is a continuation of something that for some reason got invented in the industry some years ago, and it alludes to the fact that potentially, and this is just very simplistic, that a helicopter could come along, simply touch the space or the heliport without exerting its full weight, that the occupants can disembark or embark, and then the helicopter disappears again. That a helicopter either lands or it takes off. And we haven't got time to go into a lot of detail, but it's along the lines of, say, for instance, the helicopter is touching that deck and all of a sudden there's a mechanical malfunction and it's got to touch down and exert its full weight onto that, that surface. Is the heliport actually equipped to take that helicopter? If it is then unserviceable and it's got to be repaired, are there tie downs on that area where we can secure the helicopter for the transit to the next port, for the engineers to come on board. There's a whole lot of stuff that we could talk about, and I'm around to discuss it later on. But as far as we're concerned, it doesn't exist. The helicopter lands, it takes off. As Simon quite rightly said, it's at the pilot's discretion, but we, as the yacht, we will give that availability of that space to the pilot once we have prepared the yacht for flying. But it has to be a dedicated space. We actually, believe it or not, see some heliports cross our desk, which we will then go out and visit, where if the helicopter was actually going to touch down on the space and you opened the door and jumped down the steps, probably your next place of contact would be Splosh, because there just isn't sufficient space. So this is why some people think that touch and go is the answer, and it's not.
Yeah, that's called abseiling.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we're at time. I'll just see if I can take one question from up here. Okay. Are you suggesting that a tender is always better than a helicopter? Richard, tell us why we should why we might want to use a helicopter.
Well, I think Simon really covered all of that. A helicopter is not a tender. Is a completely different asset. And funnily enough, we were discussing over lunch about maybe the next step is where we actually look at how a mothership, particularly in a fleet, a mothership and a support vessel, how those passengers are actually transported from one to the other if it's not by helicopter. But a helicopter is certainly not a tender. It's a specialised tool, and as Simon alluded to, it's your last resort.
It's there to solve a problem. Identify the problem. If the problem is you want to get from, I don't know, the G700 and you want to go straight to the yacht, well, I'm yet to see an Artemis or some other product that somehow can do that. You know what I mean. A tender can't do that. So generally, we're there. Primarily, the biggest problem we're solving is to make sure that the jet's connected with the yacht in the most quickest and effective way. I mean, that's the standard reason we're there. Yeah.
Great. All right. I think thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.